fall into the thought that we do have a lot of options for time, because we knew how difficult it was to schedule meetings for interviews and, trustee appointments.
Trustee Martin?
Yeah, when I was looking over that list, 37 initiatives, some of them are, I have more questions, I cannot prioritize them, because many of them talked about a review and then a jump to a conclusion. And I think we have only so much staff time to devote to research and review of policy issues in the coming year. So once I discuss some, I'd be comfortable to allocate our staff time for development of research review, and then we are not going to time to come to a policy decision on these. Like, we're going to not do night parking and restrictions. That's not, I don't see what we're doing. We're just prioritizing the staff time in the coming year to address these issues.
And whether you want to do that, and so
Correct,
let me be clear, for parking, that's what it says, study, and then you come to the conclusion at the end. But if there's not a will of the board, the majority of the board, to change parking regulations, that needs to be said out, we need to come to some sort of, not what are we going to vote, but we need to have an understanding of, when you say prioritizing, if there's not the will of the board to do it, I would want to get it off our plate.
And that I think we could do without a lot of back and forth dialogue. I mean, we can listen to a presentation, a brief presentation, and I think we would feel comfortable knowing, yes, I think that's worth putting on this year, next year, we can.
Or never.
Or just come back to it. And I know being new trustees, that might feel really, but I'm really confident. I know you guys,
Trustee Meyer.
I just, the point I brought up at the beginning of all this, I think we have the same problem here. I mean, some of these are extremely specific, like have a management plan for the River Bluff Trail or have a bocce court somewhere, and some are very general policy-oriented things. So they're not apples and apples, and I started thinking, okay, we have to start grouping like with like in order to be able to evaluate things in a fair way. I still have that problem. I still have a problem comparing something, a very specific proposal compared to a very broad, but for the study or review or policy change, they're not the same things. So how are we, what are we,
Just like we did today, is my assumption is, you have a list in front of you. I will call on people if they have questions about initiative. I don't know that we need to go down all of them. I mean, my thought was, as of today, we had very few questions on things that were very specific, so we don't need to waste time, talking about them. If people understand there's a bocce court proposal, they understand it. There's no need to really discuss it if no one has a question. If there's a question on capital planning, what does that mean? Because I know that was one of your proposals. Then you ask the question. But I don't feel like my view is, just because it's just the village board initiatives, just as you said, there's going to be some that are very clear, and then there's going to be some that are more extensive.
And I guess my question is, what are we trying to get to at the end? Because here we were just asking questions for clarification, but you said, no, if there's going to be more, then we need to come up with a group, we need to agree to, I would assume, 5 to 7 or some number similar to everybody else. Although I don't think that's really fair, because this is really our job, is to be coming up with these things.
So,
but I guess if what we're trying to get to is our own list, then I think we have to start divvying them up. Here are very specific things that we can very accurately predict how much time they're going to take. And here are things that are kind of ongoing, operational things, and here are like big idea things.
and I think we might get there on the 25th. But just for our own village board initiatives, I want to handle it just as we do with committees. If at the end of that meeting, we as a collective board do not want to narrow at this time, we don't. So it may just be that we are just a full discussion. And then we go into the 25th with our facilitator who will help us put them in buckets. And maybe that's when the buckets come about, if that's what the board wants. But this is, as a board, we've never, we may have no questions, just like today on the initiative, it might be clear as pie. And so to take the time to put them in buckets and get agreement on what those buckets are, we might fare better in timing to just talk as we did today. But I'm open. Trustee Carpenter?
Well, and as we are going through this, if there are things that we end up deciding is not right for 2019, doesn't necessarily mean they're not right for 2021 or 2020. So I mean, that's also some of the bigger conceptual things that might not be right for that year.
I think the main goal of the conversation is there something we all, or the majority of us agree isn't going to move forward? That would be an end product, that would be very easy. If there's something, if it's just like, well, we all kind of think it's a great idea, we just don't know the timing of it because we haven't heard from the administration, we move on to the 25th. We're not going to know how much we can prioritize into years until that further discussion on the 25th, because we won't have Rebecca's administrative, guidance for us. So otherwise, I could definitely take a stab and pass it around on putting it into buckets. I'd be glad to do that too. Rebecca? Do you want to say something?
Well, so, this is new and it's scary, but I think you should go through the discussion and just have that discussion and then evaluate after that. Because you're a talented group of people and you're new working with each other. So you're gonna see how that organically starts to take place. That's the beauty of kind of going through doing it. Well, it is. So, and then you can evaluate. But let's keep it simple. People, you can really overthink this a lot. I'm just a fan of keeping it simple.
Trustee Rockers.
Okay, two things. One is, I agree with what you're saying. We don't know, this is the first time that this is your first time doing this, but for the rest of us having to prioritize initiatives, and quite frankly, that we are coming up with for multiple years, that it contradicts some of the stuff that we talked about before about being nimble, being responsive to residents, being responsive to other concerns or trends or legislation, et cetera, that, may be coming about. I do think it's important for us to have a global discussion on the things that we all kind of prioritize. However, I'm not convinced that the whole, we'll see about the voting part or eliminating or, determining as a board what together, because I think, if that's what our objective is to decide on the top X amount of priorities for the board, then we need more time than, a meeting here and then 5 minutes to discuss it here. And secondly, however, if that is the intention of the board, then I will submit, because these are, I very thorough and some very biased, descriptions of the initiatives based on, their conclusions and assumptions that are made. So if that's what we're doing, I can politic like the rest of you and present my materials in that fashion. And that it'll be time consuming or whatever, but I'll do it. So I will be submitting those regardless, just because I don't know what the will of this board is going to be.
Okay, and to clarify too, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is, I think that we might have talked about this, but I don't think it's been discussed. There are things that are going to come up, like legislation that's going to come down the pipe. So we're going to prioritize and say, oh, obviously we can't do all of, even if we decide every single one of these initiatives is something that the board is interested in, because we've all heard it from our residents, right? If that happens, it's still not feasible for staff to work on them all at one time. So at some point, the board collectively is going to have to say, unless you just want staff to prioritize them, but if we do want, if we hand a list of 25 and we just say go for it, that's okay too, if that's what you want to do collectively as a board. If we want as a board to give direction on policy development, we will have to assume that they can't work on them all in 2019, 2021. Now, that does, what I hear is a concern, which I'm sure everyone shares, is, well, what happens if we agree this is a good thing, we don't prioritize it, but then all of a sudden this legislation gets passed and now we need to move that up as a board? We do that. So you can do that at any time on the floor of this board. You can make a motion, someone can second it, and we vote, and it goes on the agenda. That is the law. So this is more of helping out to organize the workload for our administration. But as a lawmaker, you have every right all the way through the year to, at any meeting, to say, I make a motion to put this on the next agenda, and someone seconds it and you vote. We did that once here, but I just wanted to let you know, there's also every year, we're gonna come back and refresh. We're gonna have the same discussion, and maybe it's earlier than 1 year. I just don't, I understand that I have the same concern, which is, there's gonna be things like all of a sudden the roof falls down, this happened at the county, or some piece of the facility falls down and someone gets injured. Now all of a sudden facility management moves up the line. So, you know, it's gonna have to be flexible. I think the exercise that we undertook, which it took me a long time to understand what is our goal here, is more of, we've never had the discussion about policy development for the village. And as a board, we do that together. I mean, we can't set it ourselves. So let's talk about, is there consensus at all on some of these thoughts that we've had for 3 years? I've been on board for 2.5, and we just haven't had this discussion. And then, logistically, if we agree there's 30 of them, which there may be, what do we really want to give direction to our administration with their input, and how do we integrate that into the larger picture? So it's a very big exercise. I completely agree with Trustee Bockhorst, we do not have enough time. And if I had control over the process, I would have budgeted much sooner. But this is what we got. This is what we got this year. And so if we need more time and there's willingness of the board to have another meeting, I'm here. I mean, I can do it at 4 in the morning, for God's sakes. But if not, this is what we have, and next year we'll adjust, and we'll do it a little sooner. Because I hear Trustee Bockhorst, and I do agree with her.
But I'm not advocating for more meeting time. I'm just saying, that is not what I'm saying.
Oh.
I am saying that this is a big undertaking in a little amount of time, okay, true. But also that through, just as Rebecca said, through this process, we may determine that we're not going to come out with a list of priorities, or we are. So I agree that we should have the conversation, but the expectation is kind of unclear right here, because in this initial timeline that you guys have presented, we are going to be voting, right? That was part of the rules and this executive order that we have somewhere in here. I don't know, it's 9:25. So this is going to be fun next Monday when we are here at 9:25.
I would say that was a structured starting point to develop a process in the given timeframes we had. And again, the expressed concern is valuable because even this meeting and the meeting on Monday is informational. You know, the concerns are I don't have enough information to even begin prioritizing. That's important to know. Let's collaborate on that and figure out how to address those concerns. And at what point are those concerns lessened to the point where you feel comfortable enough, at least prioritizing? Because right now we have this binder of nothing being done. Some are in motion, but can some work start to begin, and where do we want to begin that work? Because a lot of, all the initiatives combined, they require staff time and dollars. So even if you said yes to some of these administrative items or operational initiatives, that still takes time away from some of the larger ones too. So I think that's where looking at them together, but being able to separate them in some level of buckets will be important. I don't want to come with a preconceived notion of what that is. I could go back to the drawing board a million times, and I will. I don't think that's how you want me spending my time. So having the discussion is helpful for me to hear, to say, okay, what can we move forward with? What tools can we apply? Because there's a bazillion of them. and they're
Return on the
awesome.
25th.
When we're ready, yeah. And when there's some level of agreement of the direction we want to take to do that.
Trustee Mentor.
Yeah, I wanted to make a suggestion to maybe simplify this instead of looking, trying to set this for 3 years. Because since we really don't have enough time, maybe we should approach from the other end of saying, what are the top 10, let's just look at 19, and what are the things we feel like we want the administration to be addressing immediately. And just start, and because I agree, I don't think we have the time set aside to have a kind of in-depth discussion on all of these issues. So maybe the question, instead of being the next 3 years, everything, the whole universe, let's just say, what do we want to start on immediately, and let's just limit it. That's just really limit it.
Yes, so on the 25th, so the village board just needs to discuss their own initiatives among ourselves. The 25th is when we need to do something very similar. I agree, I think in pre-conversations that there's gotta be some way we move forward by saying we need to talk about a limited amount of what needs to be most important. Some are immediate and they have to be done, we'll put them in a bucket. Some are longer term, and then what do we want to prioritize for the next, if you just want 2019, that's a good suggestion. But yeah, you're gonna have to get to that. I agree, because there's gonna be.
It narrows the discussion and it narrows the
Right.
question, it narrows what we're trying to decide. If we can just say, okay, we're just gonna look like right in front of the next year.
So I think that's what
That's
you
it.
mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, which is on the 25th, you would come, and again, we could change this, but her suggestion was you come with your, top 5 to 10, I can't remember what you said, that you believe are necessary, that an immediate, that you want to move forward after you got all the information on all the initiatives. Is that what you're kind of suggesting, going into the 25th, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a smaller question to say, what are the 5, 10, or 15 things out of everything that we want to do next year versus let's prioritize everything, let's pick them out, and instead of saying, okay, I've got to take all 100 of these and put them in a list and put them all in buckets and figure out for 3 years, that's